Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Ben Thomas with UST Training, and today I'm going to be doing a webinar called the ABCs of ATGs. I've done this webinar a couple times, and boy, things are just always changing, right? So I'm going to be doing my kind of regular ABCs talk about ATGs, automatic tank gauges, but I'm continuing to add more material. The more I learn about automatic tank gauges, today's talk is mostly about compliance, using your tank gauge for compliance and leak detection purposes. We are seeing an expanding use of tank gauges, and I'll be kind of talking about that throughout the course of the day. You'll probably notice everyone's muted today. Please use the Q&A feature to type in questions. I'm going to try to save questions for the end. We have a ton of content to cover today. I'm going to go along at a pretty quick clip. I am going to record this for YouTube so you can watch it afterwards or share with your friends. But anyways, welcome aboard. Looking forward to getting everyone caught up with automatic tank gauges. And just for those who you don't know me, I'm a member of PEI. I'm on the PEI board, Petroleum Equipment Institute board this year. Very excited to be doing that. And I started my career, man, almost feels like almost 40 years ago now. I was an underground tank inspector in Vermont in the mid 80s, and then I was a tank cleanup person and compliance person for the state of Alaska all the way up to 2001. I launched one of the first state UST web pages in the country back in 96, did the nation's first Class AB operator training course in Oregon in 2003, launched online operator training commercially available 2007, have helped a whole bunch of states develop operator training programs, Maine, Montana, Kentucky, Idaho, and I've got a whole bunch of YouTube videos you might have seen called the Tank Savvy Minute. So that's a little bit about me. Automatic tank gauges are pretty cool. And I mean, some operators are really savvy with them. They're able to kind of get in there and ask questions. Some are like afraid to touch the buttons. I think for those of you on the call today who are maybe afraid to touch the buttons, I'm hope to increase your confidence to be more familiar and comfortable with an automatic tank gauge. I'm going to start off a little bit of history, like kind of how we got here, talk about some of the cool features and functions, again, largely from a compliance perspective, look at all the various makes and models that are out there. I've added a section about finding leaks because it's one thing to kind of imagine going to a console and seeing what the tank monitor says, but actually like what goes on to kind of get there. I'll hopefully make that a little more clear. Talking about kind of the inner workings of an ATG, about how all the parts and pieces work together. And then I'll kind of wind down talking about programming. It gets a little deep and dense at the end. If you don't want to stick around for the entire thing, no hard feelings there. But there's a lot of kind of detailed stuff that if the programming isn't correct, then you actually could miss a leak because of misprogramming. So automatic tank gauges serve a really critical purpose in underground storage tank management. They're a multi-purpose tool that can do many things. I like to think of them as the brain of the UST system. They're really as close as you can get to like the higher functioning system that looks at all or nearly all of your tank system, and it's the box that consolidates what I think of as important information. It's something that the operator uses to manage their tank system. It's something the inspector, I've got some inspectors on the line, inspectors use to confirm compliance. And it's a device that comes in all sorts of shapes, sizes, colors, and versions. There used to be a ton of tank monitors out there, as we're going to learn. We're kind of down to a handful of basic ones. So people call them the Veeder, if you got a Veeder-Root, the Evo, if you have an Evo Franklin model. Sometimes inspectors call it that loud thing in the back room. We call it the ATG, automatic tank gauge for short, or just simply the tank monitor. So years ago, I was actually what is now considered a Class C operator in the state of Connecticut, where I grew up, and I used to stick underground storage tanks, and nobody told me what to do. I'd stick the tank, I'd take the reading. I was trying to do fuel inventory that would then be converted into leak detection. This would have been pre-federal UST rules, but we've come a long way from the stick to the tank gauge. And so I want to invite you through this journey about the history of underground storage tanks. So this is early generation, like turn of the century gas stations, right? You got these giant above ground tanks, you got horse-drawn carts, you've got fuel bladders, and you would decamp from these giant fuel tanks into these wagons into these buckets and then get fuel off to your company vehicle. The world's first gas station, it's now 120 years old, was opened up in St. Louis, Missouri. And so this was what early gas stations would have looked like. You've got gravity-fed systems, garden hoses filling up tanks, and so things are pretty quite different back a long time ago. Around 1906, you started seeing the Tokheim dome gasoline outfit. So imagine cranking that little handle there, filling up with it through suction, kind of filling up a little a glass vial of fuel, and then dropping it into a container. And so early attempts to measure fuel were done this way. And then fueling up vehicles was kind of a messy business. This is kind of an interesting picture of a bunch of gentlemen trying to fill up gas into a car. It's not exactly the most efficient or safe way how to go about doing that. And so if there were no pumps available, you kind of had to do stuff by hand. You might hear the term Gilbarco. That's a popular term for tank dispenser manufacturing parts here. Even today, Gilbert and Barco created the T8 hand pump. And so this was an early attempt to create a dispenser. Again, we're trying to measure fuel, not so much for inventory, but to make sure that, if a customer gets 5 gallons of fuel, it's actually 5 gallons of fuel. And so we started seeing more of these visible gasoline pumps. We've got a glass vial full of fuel because unscrupulous merchants tamper with the curbside pumps to cheat customers. And so this is a way that you could visually see how much fuel was going into your customer's car. After World War II, there was an explosion of gas stations, as it were, and so suddenly inventory control became a lot more important because there's gas stations all over the place, and we're largely measuring fuel just to kind of keep track of inventory, how much fuel is in the tank, how much is needed, how much, maybe not even how much gets sold, but it's a measuring tool. The efforts for environmental compliance are still a bit of a ways off. Now, this is not an automatic tank gauge. This is a mechanical line leak detector. I find this to be particularly interesting because in 1961, mechanical line leak detectors were invented and born. What we were finding is that in 1958, the submersible turbine pump came online. And by 1961, there were a lot of leaky fuel tanks because, as many of you may know, most leaks happen from the piping and not the tank. It's usually like 9 times out of 10, it's the piping. And as soon as we introduced pressurized versus suction piping into the system, fuel was just going all over the place. So voluntarily, the industry created these red jacket line leak detectors, and it was originally marketed as a tool to prevent loss, but now it's an environmental control method to warn operators of a potential leak in the line. And so we started seeing automatic tank gauges come online. Interesting to note, when the federal rules came out in 1988, they allowed automatic tank gauging to be a method of leak detection. Back in '88, a lot of people didn't even have tank monitors. There was not much of a market. This is our famous Veeder-Root TLS 350, the most common tank monitor in the US, probably the world. But if you don't know already, warning, the TLS 350 is going away. If you're sitting in this call, you got a tank monitor that kind of looks like this, start saving your nickels because this model's been discontinued. Service and parts are becoming increasingly hard, and at some point we'll have to update to a more modern version. Automatic tank gauges have come a long way, and so now we've got all sorts of nifty stuff, colorized screens, no more buttons, internet connectivity, better security, offsite storage, offsite monitoring. And I like to think that these tank monitors are very Gen XYZ friendly. They really look more like an iPad than the old buttons of yesteryear. So what the operator probably does know about his or her tank gauge is that it checks for fuel levels, checks for water levels, checks sales activity, checks for ordering fuel, a low fuel alarm, can do inventory reconciliation if you're in a state that requires that, can check for alarms, and you can check for leaks. And so the tank monitor, in many ways, for an operator is as much operations control as it is environmental compliance control. The inspector, however, just wants to kind of cut right to the chase. Let us verify interstitial monitoring compliance. If I have double wall tanks, I'm going to know it. If I need interstitial monitoring reports, I can get that. The inspector can get verify leak test compliance. They can verify whether or not there's an electronic line leak detector and whether it's in compliance. They can search alarm histories. They can verify setup. I'll get into more of that later, third-party certification, verify overfill alarm settings, and verify sensor setup. And so the inspector is kind of looking at it, purely from a environmental compliance perspective. The operator has maybe a broader view. So your automatic tank gauge can do all sorts of cool leak detection stuff. It can do in-tank monitoring, meaning it can look for a change in volume over time in the tank that could be a suspected release. If you have a double wall tank and all of a sudden there's a bunch of fluid in a dry interstitial space, you can look for potential leaks that way. And you can also, if you have the right equipment, have your automatic tank gauge control line pressure testing. As you may know, in-tank monitoring can happen a couple of different ways. In the old days, it was a 0.2 gallon per hour periodic test. You shut down the site, you measure the fuel level in the tank over a certain amount of time. The system is calibrated for temperature difference and tank tilt and a couple other things. And so if that fuel level is steady and static over time, the tank is declared tight. But if you've got a busy site, I know we have some people on the line here that have, super busy sites, and you simply can't shut down the site for 2 hours to get a leak test. We can do the 0.2 gallon per hour continuous testing as well. I'll talk more about that later. And if you're using SIR, you can also use your tank monitor to calculate statistical inventory reconciliation tests. So these are in-tank only monitoring tests. If you have double wall tank and piping, you can monitor the interstitial space. You'll see the green here on the lower right corner there. That tells us that at one point there was a complete envelope of a hydrostatic fluid around the tank. The level dropped, and so there's maybe a leak in the line. And so there's a number of interstitial monitoring methods you can use: dry, hydrostatic, vacuum, or pressure, dry being the most common. With your line pressure test, if you have a line leak, and if you have an electronic line leak detector, you can actually monitor 3 different levels of leaks. You can look for a 3 gallon per hour leak, and if it's quiet long enough, you can dial it down and look for a 0.2 gallon per hour leak. And if it's really quiet on an annual basis, you can look for a 0.1 gallon per hour leak. The cool thing about these electronic line leak detectors, unlike the mechanical ones, is that they're keyed into the tank monitor, and they are continuously running leak tests, and you can customize those leak test results. And so you can see on the printout here, we've got some good passing test results. Again, this is for line pressure, the lines being the most likely place for a system to have a leak. You can do all sorts of things with your tank monitor. You can look for high fuel levels, like an overfill alarm. You can look for low fuel levels, you're running out of fuel. Probe and sensor identification and functionality. So you can dial in, and let's say you had 5 tanks with 5 interstitial sensors and 5 sump sensors and 5 dispenser sensors. You could actually be looking at 15 different points of interstitial monitoring. And you can determine whether or not those sensors are plugged in and working, and whether or not they're in alarm. And you can also do alarm test history results as well. So you can get a history of sensor test results. And I know the Veeder-Root TLS 350 is going away, but if you're kind of new to underground storage tanks, or you have a Veeder-Root 350, here's a little pro tip. Look for the function button right here, found on the screen, circled in red. And if you hit the function button a number of times, it will tell you what the tank monitor is programmed to do. And so you can tell if there's a 0.2 gallon per hour leak test. You can tell if it's doing CSLD. You can tell if it's interstitial monitoring, double wall tanks and piping, and PLLDs, or electronic line leak detectors, pressurized line leak detectors. And so the cool thing about the function button is that you can scroll through and see what it is programmed to do. So let's say you go to your Veeder-Root and there's no information about line testing. And so that probably is going to tell me there's a mechanical line leak detector versus an electronic one. But always make sure to go back to the all functions normal button when you're finished. And so you can always hit mode and get back to all functions normal. So the automatic tank gauge can tell us I like to break it down past, present, and future. So we can get an alarm history, what happened. You can get a current condition of what's going on, functions and conditions, what's happening right now. And you can kind of look at the future as to program settings, what can happen based on the programming. I'm going through this kind of fast here, folks. And so if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A feature, and I will answer them, hope to answer them at the end. So if you're a tank inspector and you come to the site here, you might be a little concerned that the panel's missing. There's a giant bucket underneath the tank monitor. I mean, is there water dripping down below that? Someone at least had mercifully Sharpied in the report, steps for how to get a report, right? Print, status, enter, enter. But, so when you, as an inspector, you want to first try to figure out what kind of make and model you're looking at. What is the overall condition and setting? Is there internet connectivity? I like to tell operators that if there's no internet connected to your tank monitor, and if you see an alarm in the back room, nobody in the world knows that that system is in alarm but you. And so it's important to know the difference, whether or not you have power and whether or not there are any alarm conditions. See a lot of this, unfortunately. I mean, man, look at this Vita root stuck way up at the ceiling. It's all greasy. I mean, how on earth could you even get a printout from there? It looks like the lights are out. So make sure the lights are working, make sure there's paper, make sure I like to look at those little special notes. Some tank monitors, some operators put handy little like cheat sheet notes on how to get information. I think those are kind of cool. User guide, make sure the system is not blocked and security and access is not an issue. I've seen some pretty goofy tank monitor locations over the years. You probably don't want to put it in the restroom like that person did on the left, or this one here on the right where the tank monitor is up by the ceiling. It's Illinois has a rule that says you can't have a tank monitor more than 5 feet off the ground. It might have been they saw this picture. You've got a significant trip hazard just getting a printout any given day. Went to do a tank inspection in Alaska years ago. The guy on the left went into a closet and pulled out his tank gauge and plopped it on the table. We told him he'd probably need to plug that thing in order for it to work. Picture on the right. Yeah, someone's doing leak detection, but are they doing anything with the information? Probably not. Picture on the left is an attempt at a record-keeping system. I know this kind of frustrates inspectors. You should be peeling off one of these at least once a month, and then every 30 days, and putting it in a binder. The picture on the right also shows kind of a continuous spool of readout. Operator may or may not be paying attention to that. Harris, I see you got a question going on. I'm going to try to circle back to that at the end. Again, wiring issues going on. Let's take a moment and try to identify if you're an inspector, if you're an operator, you fortunately just have one or maybe two different types of tank monitors. Inspectors have the job of seeing a whole bunch of them. This is our famous Veeder-Root TLS 350. I'm seeing on the lower left corner of the panel there, it looks like there's some instructions there. That's good. The problem is that the sump sensor is sitting, that gray tube between the breaker box and the tank monitor is a sump sensor. And so if that thing is plugged in and we're seeing all functions normal, that's probably not a good thing. The green thing to the right of the Veeder-Root is the user manual. So that's kind of good. But a lot of tank monitors just look like this, kind of in a busy area. You might have a Gilbarco EMC. That's basically a Veeder-Root TLS 350. You might have a Gilbarco EMC. Someone put a Sharpie in, TLS 350, and just to be sure, they put tank monitor on the box, which is kind of helpful. And there is a little note here. Instructions. Yeah, so there's a little post-it on how to get information out of the tank monitor. You might see a hybrid Gilbarco Veeder-Root. This is also basically a Veeder-Root TLS 350. Old Gilbarco's tank monitor is not very functional by today's standards. There was an interim step between the 350 and the 450 plus. This was the Veeder-Root TLS 450, black and white, tiny print, a little hard to read, didn't last that long. Got replaced by the Veeder-Root TLS 450 plus. This is Veeder-Root's new flagship model, and they're really encouraging people to upgrade because the 350 is effectively going away. Curious sight here where they've got two different tank monitors. Not sure what happened there. There is a user guide on the left-hand side of the Veeder-Root on the console on the left, which I always like to see is out there. It doesn't look like it's pulled out very much. Franklin, formerly Incon, has created a great series of tank monitors. This is the Evo 600 series, and I learned just through a webinar yesterday. There's kind of giant, large, and small tank monitors depending on your configuration. Super busy truck stop, you might want to use the 6000. Regular C-store, convenience store, the 600 is good. If you're on the line, you have a small tank monitor system, a small tank system with only just a couple of tanks, you could maybe get a 200 or a 400 series. But what I really like about these is like really robustly colorful visual icons. It's really easy to see what's going on. The old Incon 550 series. I think Harris, you got one of these guys here. An attempt at touch screen stuff, a little dated. The old Incon 1000. These are, you might still see some of these out there. One thing I like about this picture, you can see above the printout, there's a little business card of the company that installed the thing in the first place. It's always good to know exactly how to reach out to your service provider um, if there's an issue that comes up. There were some old tank Sentinels. This is a curious configuration. If you have one of these, the tank monitor is on the left and the piping monitor is on the right. So these two are kind of daisy chained together in order for it to do full leak detection. There's some pneumacator ones, little busy, little graphs and charts going on here. You might see an Omnitech. These are cool devices. Might see a Citizen. I've actually never seen one of these. There's some early attempts at tank monitor protocols. This is actually one of my favorite ones. Do not throw away anything that comes out of this printer. I need to see it. Thank you, Carla. Right. So Carla may not know how to operate this old dinosaur of a tank monitor, but they know that it's important information. So I always like to see what sort of little notes people are leaving on their tank monitor. Old Red Jacket Pro Links, old Ecosystems. I think these are gone now. Old Autostick Juniors. These are kind of gone too. Ecos. Lots of old makes and models out there. For you inspectors, hopefully you're going to be seeing fewer and fewer of these because the punchline of these older, no longer manufactured models is that if you can't service it and calibrate it and get parts for it, you have to change it out and get a new tank monitor. It looks like someone on the clipboard here on the right is trying to keep track of some sort of records. Not sure what all those zeros mean, but that's a transcription thing. Old RLM, old Red Jacket model. What a tank gauge does for the purpose of leak detection is to measure fuel over time, right? So we've got a probe. This is sitting inside your tank, and the probe has two different types of floats. It measures for fuel on the top and water on the bottom. And so if you know the exact size and dimension of your underground storage tank, your tank monitor will convert that information and send that information off to a control console. In 1988, when the EPA wrote the rules, the leak detection threshold was considered to be 0.2 gallons per hour. If you are not leaking more than 0.2 gallons per hour, your tank is declared tight. Why does that not come down to zero? Because it's impossible to find a leak of any size down to absolute zero. Imagine you're standing on the ground on top of a 10 or 15 or 20,000 gallon underground tank of temperature sensitive liquid that's kind of moving around. And basically, what am I trying to say here? Measurement error is really tough to overcome. And so statistically, it's been proven that if you're not leaking more than 0.2 gallons per hour, then that's considered statistically viable. So, but that is a 0.2 gallon per hour leak rate, could be up to 4.8 gallons per day, 144 gallons per month, 1,752 gallons per year. So if you have a teeny tiny leak that's below 0.2 gallons per hour, you may be, in fact, be missing the leak. Back in the old days, you'd have to test the tank at night, right? No product is dispensed during the test period. You shut down the site, you measure the fuel for a couple hours, and if the level isn't changing appreciably, the tank is declared tight. 0.2 gallon per hour test. Now here it says, if you look at the printout here, 0.2 gallon per hour test invalid. Invalid, low level test error. The tank was so empty that it couldn't get a reliable test. Yes, maybe the bottom teeny portion of the bottom of the tank is not leaking, but for periodic tests, normally the tank has to be at least half full to represent normal operating conditions. And so as convenience stores got busier and we all got more kind of impatient getting in and out of a convenience store, continuous monitoring was made up, whereas your periodic test was a fixed test of a uninterrupted bit of time. A continuous test, you basically test in between pumping events. So someone comes up and fills up their car, the test stops. They go away, test starts again. Customer comes in again, test stops. And so the computer takes all these little mini tests and does a calculation and determines a leak based on a bunch of little tests, all statistically, bundled together. And so if you have a Veeder-Root TLS 350, you'll see the term CSLD, continuous statistical leak detection, and you can see it's got a pass. The good thing about this test is that it's always testing when you're not pumping. And so you can actually get way more tests. As you may know, you got to prove your tank isn't leaking at least more than one. At least your tank is. You could have to prove your tank isn't leaking at least once a month. Here, you're doing it on a continuous and rolling basis, so you could literally be getting hundreds of leak tests in a month, which is way better than one. I want to take a moment now and talk a little bit about how this leak test works. Okay, so if you have an automatic tank gauge and you got a tank and it's full of fuel, a change in volume over time is considered a leak. And so if your fuel level is dropping appreciably during the leak test, then something's going on. Either someone's pumping or you actually have a leak in the system. Like I said earlier, you can be doing continuous testing or you can be doing periodic testing. And so you can have one test over a couple hour period of time or a bunch of little tests that are all stacked together. So again, a change in volume over time would be read as a leak. And the leak rate is 0.2 gallons per hour, or like my friend Marcel Moreau likes to say, a leak of 2 Coke cans an hour. That is only for leaks in the tank. So your automatic tank gauge finds the leak. And hopefully Joe in the back room here responds accordingly. Now, if you have a double wall tank, you can see on this picture here, this is a tank within a tank. It's not a volumetric leak test, it's any detectable change. So if you have interstitial monitoring, and if you have a dry interstice, meaning there is just air between the inner tank and the outer tank, then the presence of liquid in the interstice is considered a leak. Fuel is either leaked in from the inner wall to the outer wall and got trapped in the interstitial space, or unfortunately, what's kind of common is that liquid comes in from the ground, gets into the interstitial chamber, and it looks like a leak, but it's actually not. But if you do have an interstitial alarm, you do have to check it out. So a leak is really any liquid found in a dry interstitial space. And so the ATG interstitial sensor finds the leak. Pretty cool. If you have a wet interstitial space, imagine a brine saltwater solution filling up that interstitial space between the inner and the outer wall, the double wall tank. There is a static level of fluid, and that fluid level is measured. And so if your brine level in a reservoir begins to drop or begins to increase, then clearly something's going on. Either water's getting in from the top or fuel's being lost and it's pushing the liquid level up, or if maybe the outer chamber is leaking, then stuff is leaking out into the ground. So this is any detectable change would be a leak. It's not a 0.2 gallon per hour thing, kind of thing. So again, so the interstitial tank sensor finds the leak. That's how it's supposed to work. Now, if you have double wall piping, you have a pipe within a pipe that drains into a containment sump, like the picture here on like the box on top of the tank to the right, then any presence of liquid in the sump is considered a leak. Yes, it could be rainwater. I live in the Seattle area and it rains a lot here, and sometimes rainwater gets in and triggers the alarm and sounds it off, but you still got to check it out because it could be that a leak has happened upstream and is drained down from the dispenser, gotten into your containment sump and triggered the sump sensor alarm. Any liquid in the sump is considered a suspected release. Again, if you think you have a problem, you do have to respond. Here's some pictures of some containment sumps full of liquid. They have interstitial sensors. These pictures shouldn't even exist when you kind of think about it, because the operator should have immediately heard the sump sensor alarm go off, called the service provider, pumped out the water, and gotten to the bottom of this. So these pictures are actually found either by testers or inspectors. And so either the alarm is going off and no one's doing anything, or the alarm has been disconnected, or some other weird thing is going on. You might remember that a mechanical leak detector can find a 3 gallon per hour leak. So both of these do have mechanical line leak detectors on them. Maybe there is a leak that is less than 3 gallons per hour that's causing these sumps to fill up. But in this case here, the interstitial sensor finds the leak. If you have pressurized piping and a mechanical line leak detector, then if you have low pressure, in other words, when you try to turn on the dispenser and load fuel, if you can't hold steady line pressure of about it queues up to about 10 to 12 psi, and if it doesn't hold line pressure and kind of fails, then your leak detector trips. Your leak rate is 3 gallons per hour. And so here you get slow flow. In other words, so if the leak detector finds a leak, it throttles down the line, constricts the flow, it alerts the operator that you have potentially a 3 gallon per hour leak going on in the line. Watch for slow flow. This is not connected to your automatic tank gauge. This is something that's completely independent. So if a customer comes in and complains about slow flow, it could be the mechanical leak detector is tripped because it's not keyed into the tank monitor. This little leak here on the right is a leak that is less than 3 gallons per hour. So your leak detector may not even find the leak. If it's bigger than 3 gallons per hour, it should find the leak. Another method, and this one is tied into the automatic tank gauge, the electronic line leak detector finds low pressure in the line. It can find a big leak, a little leak, or a tiny leak, depending on how you program it. And so you can find a 3 gallon per hour leak rate, and if it's quiet, a 2 Coke can an hour leak rate, or if it's really quiet, you can find a 1 Coke can an hour leak rate, 3 and 0.2 and 0.1. So this electronic line leak detector can do the whole sweep of leak detection that would be required by law. Watch for no flow, because if the leak detector trips, it shuts down power to the turbine, and you can't do a thing until you respond and fix it. A much more clean message to give the operator. So here, the electronic line leak detector with the automatic tank gauge finds the leak. You can also have a 0.1 gallon per hour line leak test done by a certified tank tightness tester, and that's basically looking for a 0.1 gallon per hour leak. That also is not connected to the ATG. And so let's walk over to a tank pad now for a moment. We're going to pop open a lid here, and what do we see? A bunch of gravel and a cap and a little juncture box here. And so this is the top of the automatic tank gauge cap probe, and you can see this yellow wire feeding into it that gives power down to the floats that are sitting inside the tank. And this is your electrical juncture box that feeds juice back to the console. If you open up the lid and you find something like this, I'm going to guess the inspector has not, or I'm sorry, the service provider has not been in to check on the tank gauge in quite some time. Your containment sump should be looking something like this. This is an interesting picture because the red submersible turbine pump on the bottom at 6 o'clock normally is not found in the same opening as this ATG riser here. And so that's not always the best configuration, because when the pump kicks on, it's going to rattle the fuel a little bit, and it could have an effect on the float level readings. What you have inside your tank is what's called a magnetostrictive probe. And this probe is a device that measures fuel and water. And it should be periodically inspected to make sure that the floats are working properly. I've seen floats put in that have like band clamps on them and things like that, or muck and crud builds up and then makes the floats be inoperative. But what basically happens is that an electronic pulse gets sent down to the bottom of the tank probe, and that pulse is measured in time, and the time is converted to inches, and the inches are converted to gallons, and now you know exactly you've got 86.37 inches of fuel in your underground tank, which is kind of cool. So it's just a little electrical pulse that triggers the measurement that then, like I said, converts it into inches and then gallons. Then you know exactly how much fuel you have in the tank. And you may know you actually have to measure temperature of the fuel to make sure your temperature is static enough. Temperature can have an effect on your fuel measurement readings. And so these tank monitors have a series of thermometers, basically, that sit inside the probe riser and allow the tank monitor to come up with an average fuel level. If you're getting hot fuel coming into the cold ground or vice versa, your volume can change a little bit enough to where it could affect the leak test results. So your tank gauge console is going to have an LED readout. I need to update this keypad because those are going away. Special thanks to Ken Wilcox Associates, who helped with this diagram years ago. Printer, and then alarm reading. So again, if you're not really comfortable, familiar with the tank monitor, there's only so many parts here. Normally you can't get in and hurt the programming. Most of the tank monitors today are password locked out, but you can play around with it, and then if you think you might be accidentally changing a setting, it'll ask you a couple of times, are you sure you really want to do this type of thing? So that there's plenty of safeties built into that. Again, we're back to kind of finding the console here, more tank monitors with a key rack or back in the bathroom. And when I go to a site, I kind of look to see where the tank monitor is relative to operations. These two are kind of tough. You can kind of tell it's like not the most important box in the back room. And so, whenever possible, make sure your area is clear of obstructions and debris and stuff like that. What I want to talk about now, though, is the a deeper dive into programming. This is a picture of me holding up a printout. I hit the setup feature, and this is basically all the programming for the automatic tank gauge. Lots and lots of stuff going on here. How are we doing on time? Doing great. Your automatic tank gauge can tell you all sorts of things. The older tank monitors give you kind of more vaguer readings. The more advanced ones today are really kind of quite specific. So what I want to do is go through some of the functions and features here, what the display says and what the function does. So if you're a tank inspector, I see I've got a couple on the line here. I always encourage tank inspectors to print the setup report. And so this is a report of all the programming conditions. Some of this stuff is operational. Some of the stuff is, I don't know, kind of just interesting for the sake of being an underground tank nerd. And some of the stuff is actually directly applicable to compliance. And so, for instance, this is T2. It's labeled premium unleaded, so we can differentiate it from another tank. It's got a product code, and so this is how the tank monitor communicates with the cash register. It's got a thermal coefficient. This basically means what type of fuel it is. And so gasoline and diesel thermally expand at different rates. And so if you have a gasoline tank and then you swap it out to diesel and you don't change the thermal coefficient, now you're maybe getting a bad measurement. So thermal coefficient is important because the system has to know what kind of fuel it is in order for it to be an accurate test. Likewise, the tank diameter is very important. I just learned yesterday that the Evo 600 continuously monitors the tank the diameter and dimensions. And so you need to know exactly the diameter of the tank. You need to know exactly how full the tank is as well. And so this site, we know exactly it was 119.63 inches in diameter. It was checked one time, and the tank is measured in at 11,903 gallons. It is not a 12,000, it's called a 12,000 gallon tank, but it's actually literally 11,903. So if you were to plug in 12,000 into here, the tank is bigger than what it appears. It's going to mess up your fuel level reading. So when the tank system is set up, you have to know exactly the tank size, and we know what type of float in diameter and probe series is in the tank monitor. At 2 inches of water, an alarm will sound. This is a programmable number. If someone had, put in 5 or 6 inches, that'd be bad because now your pump is sitting in water. And so you want to make sure this warning level is set below the pump intake level so you're not sucking water into the customer's car. At a high water limit, this is, what am I trying to say here? So yeah, okay. So you basically you have a high and a high level for water, and so there's a double layer of warning about water getting into the tank. This is I don't know why Veeder does this. Let me go in reverse order here for a second. So at 90% full, an alarm will sound. If the tank is filled to 10,712 gallons, an overfill alarm will sound. A secondary alarm will sound at 95% full. At 11,307 gallons, a high alarm will sound. And then at a max or 100% full or 11,903, a max overfill alarm will sound. So under this program condition, 90, 95, and 100 alarm will go off. As an inspector, you want to make sure at a minimum, this is not set any higher than 90%. I've seen these set at 95. Someone comes in, they want to kind of push it a little bit more. That's not legal if you're using overfill alarms as your overfill prevention method. Alarm will sound at 10% capacity because deliveries, if you get down to 10% full, an alarm's going to sound that says, hey, we need to fill up the tank, and just wanted to let you know. And then there will be another low product alarm. If you get down to 1,000 gallons, you also got another low warning alarm as well. These get a little esoteric here, and let's not worry too much about them, but some of these are more important than others. The leak alarm limit. During a test, an alarm will sound if this amount is expected to be lost during the test period. And if during a test, if you immediately lose 50 gallons right out of the gate, then an alarm will sound as well. In other words, it's trying to do a 2-hour leak test, but automatically it can't find 50 gallons. And so it's going to alert the operator to that effect. Tank tilt means that the tank is, in this case, dead flat level. A lot of tanks are installed a little bit of a tilt. So the tilt has to be calculated because that's going to affect the measurements of the system. If you got a tilted tank and it's not programmed as such, your leak detection results may not be valid. If your tanks are manifolded together, so you've got a little siphon bar in between, you'll know if that's the case. And then this is the leak minimum periodic test, the minimum volume percentage conducted for a valid test. So this tank has to be at least 28% full. If you're the astute inspector, you want to cross-reference that to the third-party certification, make sure that that is correct. That kind of seems a little low here. So in other words, the tank has to be almost a third full in order for it to be a valid passing test. And what you normally get is a quick test, a 2-hour test to determine, the standard test is 2 hours, the quick test is 1 hour. Under this setup condition, no alarm will sound if the annual test fails. And so this alarm has been disabled. It doesn't mean it won't do the test. It doesn't mean it won't print out the results. It just means that the alarm is disabled. I'm not sure the 450s even do that anymore. Likewise, under a periodic 0.2 gallon per hour test, no alarm will sound if the periodic test fails. I'm not sure why this is disabled. If I were the manufacturer, I'd want all the bells and whistles going off if you had a failed test. If you are running a 3 gallon per hour leak test, that's kind of rare. That is disabled as well. You can do averages over the last 10 test results. You can do averages over the last 5 test results. You can notify the operator of tests so pump can be turned off. So you can actually program it to turn off the pump during a test. This is kind of a problem. So imagine you're doing a leak test and it's like midnight and you think you've got free 2 hours ahead of you, then suddenly someone comes in and pumps fuel. That aborts your test, right? So this actually should be notified so that the operator knows to turn off the pump so that they can run a valid test. Likewise with siphon breaks. And then this programming simply says that 10 minutes after delivery, a report will spit out of the tank monitor to show the delivery. So there's a whole bunch of settings. There's a whole bunch of kind of warranted points here that are behind the tank monitor to be able to help the operator know that their system has been programmed exactly. Many years ago, these tank monitors were never looked at that seriously. Most states now require that the tank monitor be certified annually by a licensed contractor of the manufacturer to make sure all the settings are correct. Once a year, those settings should be verified to make sure that the programming is not wrong. And all tank monitors have to be evaluated by a third party. And so this is the Veeder-Root Tank Monitor Series. It was given to a laboratory program. They're able to verify that, yep, under these conditions, this tank will find a 0.2 gallon per hour leak rate. So this is kind of, again, more kind of warranty type work. It is it's mission critical, really, because you can't just put a tank monitor on the wall and kind of walk away from it. It really has to be calibrated to the exact site conditions. It has to be calibrated to the standards for which it was tested by. And so this particular tank monitor has a whole bunch of conditions here, that show what it was tested to find. So under ideal conditions, here is how the tank monitor should work. For instance, this tank was tested for a maximum of 30,000 gallons. If you happen to have a 35,000 gallon tank, it would not work. You have to wait 8 hours between delivery and testing. A couple other conditions here that would otherwise potentially interrupt or compromise the validity of the testing rules. So I don't want to get kind of too much into the details here. There are things that will mess up your leak test results. If the temperature is swinging too much, if you don't measure for water if you don't run the test long enough. There's a number of reasons why you could actually get an invalid test. And so ideally what we want to do is control all those conditions so the tank monitor can run its most accurate leak test as possible. Like these are just more kind of third-party certifications. Again, these are kind of like the warranties. You should have a copy in your compliance records. If you're an inspector, you might have a copy in your inspection book when you go out. And a service provider should also give you a copy of that when they finish doing the test, their annual test. So I like to call these new EPA rules. These have kind of been around for a while, but everyone here in the room who's an operator must be doing monthly walkthrough inspections, including checking the automatic tank gauge console. There's really no reason not to check your console every single day, and there's no reason by today's standards you shouldn't be internet connected and have all your alarm information be sent right to your cell phone. And so, again, here's a case where 30 days is kind of the minimum requirements. You should be really looking at it continuously and at least taking a peek in the back room at least once a day to in order to make sure that there's no alarms. You must be looking for water monthly, and you must check the console probes sensors annually for proper functioning. In other words, okay, the box on the wall, it looks like it's working, but once a year, have a qualified service technician certified for your make and model to be able to go in there and verify the program settings, make sure the probe is working properly, make sure the power is on, all that sort of stuff. So there's monthly stuff you got to do, and then there's annual stuff you got to do as well. The monthly walkthrough can be done by the UST operator. A number of states have their own monthly walkthrough forms. A number of states also use PEI RP900 as a monthly walkthrough form. Make sure the tank gauge is functioning and not an alarm. Check out the last test results. Make sure any alarms are responded to. And PEI also does have a daily optional form if you want to be doing your daily inspections as well. If you're a very busy convenience store site, I would recommend that. I think there are some people on the line here that have kind of smaller tank systems, may not be as important as like a busy convenience store. The annual ATG certification really should be done by a certified technician who is certified by the manufacturer. More and more tank monitors today are being password locked out, and more systems now can be remotely diagnosed through the internet. And so you can actually save a couple nickels by having a more modern tank system because you can get remote diagnostics and it can maybe save a service. And even things like software updates can be pushed out remotely versus having a technician having to come and do it manually. There is a form called Recommended Practice RP1200, Appendix C7 for those who care. And that's the checklist to make sure that that the probe is free of damage. The probe is pulled out and inspected and cleaned. The floats move freely. The float levels agree with fuel and water levels on the tank gauge and on the stick. Make sure your overfill alarm is set to 90% and measure inches of water, then alarm. Oh yeah, so basically trip the water float to make sure that it's working properly. So again, it's really important to have your tank gauge certified to make sure it's being used to its optimal condition. Someone sent me a picture of this recently. I like to say, don't be that guy. If you look here, if machine is beeping loudly, push red alarm button to silence it. That's like that's what you're not supposed to do. So don't be that person. Someone on one of my YouTube videos recently asked if there was a way to make the alarm sound quieter, and I had to write back and saying that's not what you want to do. You want that alarm to go off because, quite frankly, if you're an operator, this alarm is going to go off someday. It could be water, it could be a leak, it could be a mistake, but the alarms are there for a reason. So don't try to be that person who would do a workaround. And it is important to note that ATGs that are no longer serviced or certified must be replaced. I think there's a couple of older ones here on the call today, older tank monitors represented on the call today here. And so long as you can find a certified service tech who can get certified parts, you're okay. But it is important that, again, like the Veeder-Root TLS 350, the TS series, those are all kind of going away. And so if it can't be serviced and updated, you probably need to start saving for a new tank monitor. And I do want to mention really briefly, I was interviewed not too long ago on a federal DoD report that showed that U.S. automatic tank gauges are subject to security vulnerabilities. And then right after that, I found a little inventory printout sheet online hacked by ISOLAC 404. And while it may seem illogical that your little site could be the subject of a hack, there's all sorts of nefarious cyber attacking going on. There's global attempts to try to infiltrate, electronic systems. What's the there's an acronym, I forget. It's like ICS, International Control System. There's all sorts of digital electronic devices out there that hackers are trying to crack into. And what this federal report found is that there was huge vulnerability of automatic tank gauges that were connected to the internet. And you can get a system, you can get a nefarious group to infiltrate it, get through the fire, get through your tank monitor and then to your point of sales or into your network as a whole. So you want to absolutely make sure, check with your manufacturer, check with your service provider, find out to make sure that you're using this proper safety precautions to make sure your tank gauge is not being hacked. It could be for financial reasons. It could just be for just business disruption reasons. So do not think you are not subject to this. I've got more about this on an article in my newsletter if you want to learn more about that. It is also another reason to get the latest automatic tank gauge model. They are much more secure than what they used to be. I want to kind of wind down with saying automatic tank gauges can do so much more. I've been getting more interested and involved in kind of like the business and functionality side of automatic tank gauges. They can do stuff that's not even related to compliance stuff. They can analyze fuel sales and make predictions. They can find meter drift. And so if your meter calibration is loosening and you're basically giving the customer more gas than what they're paying for, then you want to know that. Tony Caputo with Warren Rogers Associates did a great webinar with me recently talking about losses versus leaks. And a loss is fuel that you're kind of losing. It's not a leak in the system, but it's fuel that's getting out of the system, usually through meter drift and stuff like that. And you're actually losing money that way. So it's a financial loss, not an environmental leak. And so tank monitors of today can look for stuff like that. The Evo system through Franklin actually has a sump corrosion management system. And so you can actually manage corrosion control in your sump through the tank monitor. You can also monitor pump flow rates and determine which are your most optimized nozzles and not. So there's a whole bunch of businessy things you can do. If you want to learn more about that, talk to your manufacturers. But more and more automatic tank gauges are really becoming the super brain of the system. And I don't know if I go as far as saying, what am I trying to say? Your tank monitor really should be internet connected. If you're not, especially if you've got a bunch of sites, and so you want to be able to know if you need fuel, get an alarm on your phone. There's a number of third-party software programs out there that will alert you of alarms. There's a lot of really great internet connectivity that can help you kind of modernize your tank system instead of just being a box on the wall that kind of beeps and blinks every once in a while. I do have a funny story. Years ago, I created a little sticker that I wanted to put on the Veeder TLS 350 that says, "Am I beeping or blinking? Please call." And then you take a Sharpie and you write down your number so that your clerk who walks in the back room, they sees the red light, they don't know what to do, they see the sticker, they call the number. I went to my local gas station where I live, and I was going to try to fit test the sticker on the tank console box to see what it was like, and there were 3 sump alarms going off. So obviously there is a need for a sticker. One other story, I was shooting a tank savvy minute video not too far from me on the Evo 500, 550, 600 series. I was doing one on cybersecurity, and I go in the back room, and in giant letters, someone had pasted a giant sticker on the tank monitor that said password is, and then they listed the password. It's like, oh man. So yeah, if you put passwords on your tank monitors, do not do that. I've got a whole bunch of YouTube videos about tank monitors. I got a whole series on the Veeder TLS 450 Plus. I've got a whole series on the Evo 600. I've got a ton on the Veeder TLS 350. So if you want to get more comfortable and familiar with how to get that information, then please see my YouTube channel, youtube.com/UST training. And every 30 days, no, I'm sorry, most Fridays, and I think a number of you on the line attend these, I do a webinar chat, kind of a fireside chat. Unlike today, I get to see everyone's faces and we get to meet other tank professionals around the country and feel free to join us most Fridays. It's on Zoom, and we kind of just talk about what's important with underground storage tanks. It doesn't cost anything, and I've been able to kind of see some really cool professional friendships and relationships foster with it. So please join us one of these days. But that's kind of all I got here. Harris, I see you got a question. I'll attempt to answer it. If you do have questions about automatic tank gauge stuff, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. Oh, okay, great. So Harris, I have an Evo 550. I was wondering how I could figure out the minimum amount of fuel to perform a valid leak test. Yes, that information is published, Harris. I will there is a national group that catalogs all those minimum standards. I will send you that link right after class. Is it just an amount where the level where my normal Harris, normally the amount is set at 50%. It could be a little less than that, but your tank normally, if you're doing a periodic test, it should be at least half full. And so it wouldn't be the low level light, it would be the how just have to look at your tank volume and see if you're at least 50% full, but I'll get that exact number to you afterwards. And really, by now, Harris, by this point in the game, whoever installed the system, or whoever certified the tank monitor last, should have had that programmed correctly long ago. So hopefully, it's programmed correctly. But I will get you that. I will get you that link after class. Woo, covered a lot of material today. My mouth's a little dry from talking. I'm gonna hit the. Oh, here's another question. How much does a modern ATG system cost? That's a good question. I mean, time's kind of speeding up for me these days, but it used to be like $10,000 was what was a ballpark number. But like if you're going from a Veeder-Root 350 to a 450 plus, you can usually reuse the floats and sensors, so that's a cost savings there. Does anyone have a price tag they're willing to share in our Q&A feature? So yeah, I mean, if you're just changing out the brain, oh, it looks like Reggie raised his hand. Reggie, if you have some numbers to throw in the box, that'd be great. Um, yeah, so but it's really it's like tens of thousands of dollars. It's the part plus travel time plus installation time, depending on how much wiring's involved. You got to change out a bunch of sensors and stuff like that. But that's a good question. I need to. I'll be going to the Petroleum Institute equipment trade show this October. I can do some research for you and get back with you at that on Chris. Yeah, but 10,000 plus. Is there anyone else that's got a number they could throw out at us? It ain't cheap. But for accuracy, security, just for accuracy, security, and storage, it's really kind of well worth it. And it's hopefully I think these new like the Evo 600 and the TLS 450 Plus, they're going to be around for a long time. So it's not going to be something you have to be updating like your like your phone every 2 or 3 years. Anyone else have a feel of the cost? Reggie, if you do have a number, that'd be great to throw out at us. Ooh, and okay. New ATG installed about 18,000 before COVID, now more. Okay. So it looks like it's double from when I thought it was. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, parts are going up, labor costs are going up. As you may or may not know, there's kind of a critical shortage of qualified service technicians out there, and so that is complicating things as well. That's kind of all I got for today, folks. I'm going to stop the record button.